Welcome back to Open Line. We are talking about the Nashville mayor's race and also the NewsChannel5 poll that came out last week. Pat Nolan is here. Berje Yacoubian is here with Yacoubian Research. We have several calls, so I want to take a couple of calls. Let's go to Robert first. Robert, are you there?
You doing there?
Hi, yes. What's on your mind?
I want to talk about the low income for low income housing and unemployment. Just gonna get a raise minimum wage gonna get raised up or not? That's the question.
Okay, that's one of the issues, raising the minimum wage or not. You've identified in the poll several issues that are incredibly important. Affordable housing one. Did this other issue of a mandatory minimum wage, a livable wage, did that come up?
We did not, but I think the housing issue was one of the four that we asked about, and it came in third place. Housing is perceived to be more important, obviously, for lower income people, for lower income voters. It is strongly correlated to socioeconomic status. And while we did not ask income, because there is no comparable income data for in the voter registration list, we can tell about income by what precinct they vote in and what census tract they belong to, because we have data by zip code and census tract.
And there you see issues to be addressed immediately. That's
right.
That's the chart.
Right.
There were 4 areas. Transportation, traffic jams, clearly that's the biggest issue.
And I can tell you that work after an hour and a half in traffic.
Right, and I can tell you that in the northwestern and central, the core of the city, the housing issue was more formidable, more important than, let's say, in southwest part of the county.
In the area of minimum wage, I might point out that Megan Berry, one of her attack lines in one of her TV spots is that it's a quote she claims that I think was that David Fox gave to Nashville Public Radio that says he opposes raising the minimum wage. Now, there is no minimum wage in Nashville by law. There really isn't one in Tennessee. In fact, the only state law says it can't be higher a minimum wage in any area than it is for the federal law, which I think is $7.25. So if Metro decided to have a minimum wage, they probably have to get permission from the state to do it. If they set one on their own, I wouldn't be surprised that the Republican supermajority wouldn't set it aside up on the Hill. Right.
This is one issue where the two candidates have said opposing things, but it's really not up to them. They would have to, as you said, the legislature.
And if they wanted to do one, then they have to get the new council to approve it as well. So it's not something the mayor could come in and sign an executive order and suddenly there's a minimum wage. Now, they might be able to do something like that within Metro jobs. In other words, the jobs that Metro has or the jobs that Metro contracts out for, although there's a whole other issue about Metro jobs and contracting that came up from the amendment that was passed on August 6th that is well going to be in court, or at least going to be in the council, trying to figure out exactly what the voters approved and what it means, because it looks like we're going to have to hire at least 40% of local workers on a lot of these jobs. Above $100,000 have to be local, and 10% have to be low income, and a lot of people who do those things say they can't bid on that, and it still exempts out-of-town companies. So we'll see. There's the fight still to come on that, and that may mean we can't have time to debate the minimum wage about that until we get these other things worked out.
There is a model for this. Seattle and Portland have done this, and in fact Shelby County has something like that. It basically says that if you receive a bid, if you win a bid to do city work, you have to pay a livable wage, which I think is defined somewhere around $13.28 an hour. Even Shelby County, Tennessee has done so. So there are some models that they could use to replicate what works. But what they can't do is say everybody has to pay this minimum wage when there is no citywide minimum wage law beyond the $7.50 or whatever the minimum wage is nationally.
I think even doing it for Metro jobs would be controversial in the council.
Right, right. Let's go to Jay. Hello, Jay.
Good evening, gentlemen. I've got a question. Mr. Nolan, on the Howard Gentry endorsement, how big is that? And also, how does that affect the polls? What do you think about that? And also, is this the most money spent in a Nashville mayor campaign? Thanks.
I think we already set that spending record before we ever got into the runoff. Now, there was a deadline, I think, that happened Monday of this week. All the candidates had to cut off how much money they'd raised and then report it. Now, exactly when the Election Commission releases that, I don't know. It's probably going to be, I think, maybe tomorrow, maybe late this week, early next week. So we'll get some idea of how much money's been spent in the runoff. And I suspect it's been considerable, but remember, we've only had 4 weeks to spend money, so we haven't spent at the levels that we had during all the months that happened before we run up to it. As for the Howard Gentry endorsement, it came out of the blue. The Berry people swear, and I've heard from other sources, they didn't know Howard Gentry was coming to her news conference and was going to endorse her. It was sort of a boomerang effect from some of the ads that apparently Mr. Fox's campaign has been running on the African American radio stations. That perhaps I thought he was hoping that would have an impact in the black community, but not like that. It could be significant. I want to continue to see what the Berry campaign does with the endorsement. I mean, you've got another 2 or 3 days left in early voting, then you've got voting on Election Day. What will they do to promote that? Will Howard Gentry be on the black radio stations with a spot, along with perhaps Megan Berry, talking about how they ought to vote for her? Will there be a round of going to black churches on this coming Sunday with the two of them working some congregations out there trying to boost up the vote in the black community? This race could still be close enough that the size and the margin in the black communities that Megan Berry receives could be the difference.
And it's so critical, and I want you to talk about this, Berry. It's so critical about who is able to get out the vote the best, which is, it sounds so obvious. But you pointed out in the primary, August 6th, the vast majority of people who voted were over 50. A large percentage, 35% or so, were over 65.
2/3 were over 50.
So that's a big percentage. Does one candidate benefit from the fact that older people are more likely to vote? Does it benefit David Fox?
Yes. In the August election, David Fox was the beneficiary of the older voter, because most of the older voter that came out in disproportion to their size were in the southwest part of the region. That made up about 35%, and he had a significant lead over Megan Berry. Berry's challenge now is to get the under 35 to turn out and vote, because they make up roughly 12%, and their output was not par. So she's got the challenge of getting her voters out and really buttressing her or building on her victory in August onto the general election.
Both these candidates were in the low 20s for their numbers. I think Megan Berry had about 24%, Fox had about 23%. Normally when we go into these mayoral runoffs, somebody's already close to 40, and so getting the rest of the way maybe isn't as hard. We've never had a candidate who finished first in August that lost in the runoff. So usually the second place person has gotten the runoff but has not won. Is that what's going to happen again? Megan Berry did a good job of getting out of her base. Her base would be in the Vanderbilt, Belmont, Hillsborough area, and the historic districts over in East Nashville. She did a good job with that. She needs to expand that out. With Phil Bredesen's endorsement, with Charles Robert Bowen's endorsement, now with Howard Gentry's, she may be able to put the rest of the conservative to moderate Democratic support along with enough African American support to put together the coalition to get her above 50%. For David Fox, it's to maximize his base, which he's right, it's mostly in the southwest part of the county. That's where you've got Belmead, Forest Hills, Oak Hill, the kind of areas that socioeconomically and others, but it's also Bellevue, because if you look at the early vote in Bellevue in August, that's where David Fox won. He won 4 of the 10 satellite precincts coming up. Now, Megan Berry overall won early vote, but it's because she did well enough in some of the other areas, and frankly, Fox did not do well at all. Neither Fox nor Berry did very well in the African American areas, which would have been Bordeaux in this case, and maybe out in the southeast. But he did much worse than Megan Berry, so she at least starts perhaps with an advantage there.
And has the Howard Gentry endorsement.
I think that's critical. That's where she has to really focus and make sure that the African American vote turns out, because if it does, she will get at least 4 out of 5 of those voters. She did very well in the poll post-debate, and she's likely to get those voters, but they have to turn out. So think of it this way: every 10 people who vote out, she gets ahead by 6 votes. 2 will go for her, 8 will go for her, 2 will go for Gentry, and she'll get ahead. And that kind of solid support, and that shouldn't be really that hard, because regardless of what anybody says, this race has in a way turned into a partisan race. The partisan and ideological lines have been drawn, and voting patterns have established themselves as traditional. In that sense, she's every incentive to use the Howard Gentry endorsement in a positive way and make sure that he got 12,000 votes. So she could get as many as 9 or 10,000 of those votes. And that's a considerable vote in an election that might have 110,000, 120,000, as Pat indicated earlier.
You talk about the partisan nature of it. We can talk more about that, also take more calls. We have to take a break, so we'll do that. We'll take a break and be back right after this.